Hello everyone and welcome to today's discussion on Europe's responsibility to help protect populations abroad, the case of Myanmar. This is the second in a series of events co-organised by the London-based NGO Protection Approaches and the European Centre for the Responsibility to Protect, which is based at the University of Leeds. My name is Adrian Gallagher. I am an Associate Professor in International Relations in the School of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds, and I'm also co-director of the European Centre for the Responsibility to Protect and editor of the journal Global Responsibility to Protect, which just this month has published a double special issue on the crisis in Myanmar, which is open access if anyone would like to read it. Today, I am delighted that we could bring together a panel of such distinguished speakers, as I am joined by three experts. First, Dr. Sasa is the Union Minister of the Ministry of International Cooperation and spokesperson of the National Unity Government of Myanmar, and also former Myanmar Special Envoy to the United Nations. Second, Paola Pampaloni is Deputy Managing Director in the EU's External Action Service for the Asia and Pacific and has 28 years experience in EU institutions. And third, Elizabeth Pramendorfer is Senior Human Rights Officer at the Global Centre for the Responsibility to Protect. She's based in Geneva and also leads the Centre's work of the Group of Friends on R2P, which is an informal intergovernmental platform for permanent missions to the UN, which consists of over 50 cross-regional member states. Collectively, therefore, they bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in relation to Myanmar, the EU, and the responsibility to protect. Since the coup on February the 1st this year, the situation in Myanmar has deteriorated to the point that UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet described it as a multi-dimensional human rights catastrophe, with an estimated 897 people killed, around 6,500 people arrested, and over 200,000 people forced to flee their homes. The systematic nature of the violence has led to a growing consensus that this constitutes crimes against humanity. It is for this reason that academics, policymakers, civil society, and everyday citizens, as we see in Myanmar, are discussing the crisis within the context of the responsibility to protect. In 2005, UN member states unanimously endorsed the responsibility to protect, which sets out both domestic and international responsibilities to prevent the four crimes of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. Whilst the agreement was forged at the UN and can therefore be viewed as a UN principle, paragraph 139 also identified the role that regional organisations can play in helping the UN fulfil the R2P, as it's commonly known. In fact, the 2011 annual report focused on the role of regional and sub-regional arrangements and stated that they play a critical role. With this in mind, the EU can be seen as an important part of a broader human protection architecture with the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, UN Human Rights Council, ICC, and regional organisations such as ASEAN and the EU playing a key role. It is with this in mind that today we focus on the EU and Europe. Just so that everyone is aware, the event is being recorded. Feel free to submit questions to the panel via the Q&A. And of course, feel free to tweet using the hashtag R2PEurope, and Protection Approaches can be found at IBVPrev, and the European Centre is at ECR2P. So without further ado, let us turn our attention to the speakers. I have the first question, which all three speakers will be asked and given an opportunity to respond to. What is Europe's responsibility to help protect people in Myanmar? And Dr. Sasa, if I can hand the floor to you. Thank you very much.
I would like to reiterate our thanks to European Union and EU member states and the UK and EU for all the start of sanctions that has been placed on this military junta in Myanmar. this military junta in Myanmar that we are facing are the guilty of a crime against humanity. They are guilty of a crime, war crimes, and these are the people, the military junta that is known for ethnic cleansings, that's known for genocides against the Rohingya brothers and sisters, against Kachin, Zakrin, Mun, Rakhine Shans, and now against all the people of Myanmar. So just to give the brief update on the situation in Myanmar now that, as you have spoken, more than 924 is closing to 1,000 people of Myanmar being killed by this military junta, and more than 6,000 people who have been illegally arrested by this military junta. That includes 4-year-old children arrested because they cannot find their parents to be arrested. And that shows how cruelty of regime that we are facing right now. And more than 2,000 people we are evading arrest warrants. And as a result of these consequences, under the hands of this military junta, COVID-19 crisis is rising, and the food insecurity is rising, as the United Nations World Food Program have said that 6.4 million people of Myanmar will be without food by the end of October this year. And more than 1.2 million people have been displaced by this military operation across the country. That include Rohingya brothers and sisters. And more than 27 million people of Myanmar, which is 500,000 people of my country, will be under extreme poverty within a year, according to United Nations Development Program. So when it comes into responsibility to protect, it is a very, generally speaking, people think that it's all about military, but to us, it's not about all military. It's about humanitarian. It's about how can European Union, EU can, or Europe, or UK, or the country around the world can help protect the people of Myanmar from COVID-19 crisis, which is now rising to the sky in my country. Indeed, it is a huge concern right now. And it is also the question of how can Europe country can help us protect our people from starvation. How can they help us protect our people from health crisis, education crisis, economic crisis, that humanitarian crisis that I just speak about? So to us, when it comes to responsibility, it's all about responsibility. And the responsibility as a human being, one part of the world suffer, we all suffer. When one nation in the world face injustice, the whole world must feel injustice. That is about responsibility. So as a human being, I feel that many times we failed to extend our helping hands to protect the people who are in danger of being wiped out by this kind of act of terrorism against human beings. Really, this military junta are adding crime against humanity, against the people of Myanmar. They are acting every day atrocities against the human being in Myanmar. So when it comes to responsibility to protect, is a responsibility to protect them, the people of Myanmar, from COVID-19, to protect them from the starvation and hunger, to protect them from being homelessness, protect them from being tortured, intimidated, and all these widespread and systematic. So I hope that that is clear and loud, that we need really the protections from our dear friends and allies around the world in these the most difficult times in the history of my country.
Thank you, Dr. Sasa. I think you outlined the multidimensional protection crisis that's unfolded in Myanmar very well. and that COVID-19 seems to have been weaponized by the military junta, to use Simon Adams's phrase. Elizabeth, if we could move on to you with the same question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. And I really want to thank Protection Approaches and ECR2P for hosting us and facilitating this discussion. I think it's so timely and so relevant. And it's an absolute honor to be here with Dr. Sasa and with Paola and to discuss about Europe's responsibility to protect in the context of Myanmar. I also want to thank Detmer behind the scenes who made all of this happen and brought us together. And I know how much it takes on the organizational part. So many, many thanks to Detmer as well. I want to begin by just flagging, as many of you on the panel and in the audience may know, I'm not the Global Center's country expert on Myanmar. You will be familiar with the work of my colleague, Nadira Court, who has been leading on this for many, many years. But I am the Global Center's representative before the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So what I do hope to bring to today's discussion is very much an assessment or a couple of thoughts on how the EU and European governments may uphold their responsibility to protect in the case of Myanmar through the UN system, as well as on the bilateral level. Adrian, I really liked your question because I noticed you asked what is the responsibility to protect and not is there a responsibility to protect in the case of Myanmar. And I think Myanmar is perhaps one of the few examples where there seems to be almost consensus that R2P clearly applies. We've all seen the placards, the banners, the candles. We've seen thousands of citizens across the country coming out every day calling on the international community to uphold their responsibility to protect, because they know that states have a responsibility. And the response that we've seen after the coup and since February, and I know that Paola will talk about this more after me, but I just want to commend the EU for their response, for imposing several sets of sanctions on perpetrators and on entities, which is very, very important. But I want to bring the question back to what is R2P by really highlighting that the international community and Europe and the world, the region, had a responsibility to protect the people in Myanmar long before the coup. To us, what is astonishing to see is that we've seen such an outrage and immediate response by the international community following the coup, something that we haven't really seen at the onset and in the aftermath of the genocide, which only happened 4 years ago. And I think this brings me a bit to the bigger issue for me, which is that of, we talk in the international multilateral fora, in the UN system, we talk about prevention, structural prevention, the cost efficiency of prevention versus response. But still, as an international community, I feel we still fail to prevent atrocities. And Myanmar really, it's the most striking example. Dr. Sasa has mentioned that so clearly just before. It's the perpetrators who are now committing crimes against humanity against the citizens of Myanmar who are also responsible for genocide against the Rohingya. So the conversation we're having today is really a conversation we should have had 10 years ago. And so I think that there is an essential element when it comes to discussing R2P in Myanmar, which you mustn't forget, and that is accountability for past atrocity crimes and holding perpetrators to account, because victims have a right to justice. And there's also a responsibility to address root causes of genocide and ongoing crimes against humanity, because if they're not addressed, it's like you put a plaster on an open wound, so to say. So that includes widespread impunity for perpetrators who are in power and who are committing atrocities as we speak, but it also includes addressing systematic discrimination against minority populations, including the Rohingya. So all of these are aspects that I think are essential for the international community, for the EU, for the region, for individual member states to really make the basis of their policy decisions and on their engagement, short-term and long-term, in the context of Myanmar. But I want to end by getting to the heart of your question, which is, of course, there is an immediate responsibility to protect citizens across the country right now, because lives are at risk as we speak. And I want to mention 5 very concrete measures that the EU and any government around the world can and should take immediately and as we speak in order to uphold this responsibility to protect. The first is to push the UN Security Council to impose a global arms embargo. The second is to actively support and push for non-recognition of the junta, expand existing targeted sanctions, divest and sever ties with any businesses linked to Myanmar's military. And the last point, and I've mentioned this before, but it's the need for justice for perpetrators. And as we speak, this needs to happen through international justice, given the lack of domestic avenues, through the ICC, through the ICJ, but also through universal jurisdiction. I know we'll have a lot of time to go into those, so I'll end here, and I'll hand back over to you, Adrian. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You situate the coup within the context of history, which is obviously important because this is very much just the latest phase. It certainly didn't happen overnight on February the 1st. Nice also to get actual concrete steps, which in academia we don't actually get specific measures often talked about as much as they should. Paola, if I can come over to you with the same question. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Adrian, and thanks first to the organizer for inviting me in this very, very timely and important conversation. And I wish to thank Dr. Sassa and Elizabeth for the intervention, and Dr. Sassa for having highlighted the critical situation in the country that we are fully aware, and also for Elizabeth to have given this very concrete recommendation also to the EU. I'm very glad that we can have this conversation today. Very much involved personally on the crisis in Myanmar, not only from the 1st of February, but I would say in the last 4 years. Been very much involved since the crisis of the Rohingya took place. When we talk about a responsibility to protect and the Europeans' responsibility, we have been involved in this work of the R2P within the UN framework. And when we talk about this, we talk about 3 different pillars of this responsibility to protect. One is to protect our own population, and the EU, of course, is protecting very much its own population. But the responsibility of the European Union is also to encourage and assist individual states in meeting this responsibility, and not only the EU, but I would say the international community. And this we have done a lot. We are not talking about a crisis that suddenly erupted on the 1st of February. As I said, I've been involved in the work of Myanmar for the last 4 years, for the previous crisis and even before. And this was a period, what we call the pillar 2 of our responsibility, try to avoid, make all our action to avoid or to take a preventing action under this pillar. And we did it also in regard of Myanmar, very much after the crisis that generated after the military action against the Rohingyas. And this was done through a dialogue that was very much linked also to our trade issues, and we were using our trade regime to make sure that some concrete democracy and reform and implementation of the Kofi Annan recommendation were put in place, using all our tools, the sticks of the trade, stick of development, our political capital, to make those reforms that would have generated more peaceful solution of this gigantic crisis. But now, after the 1st of February, we are talking about the pillar 3 of this responsibility to protect, which is the pillar when a country, a state, is manifestly failing to protect its own population. And here the international community must be prepared to take this appropriate action in a decisive manner and in accordance with the UN Charter. We are really in this case, in this moment with Myanmar, and what action are, what tools are in the hands of the European Union. And I'm very glad that Dr. Sasha mentioned that we are not talking only about military action, because of course, when we talk about activating the Chapter 7 of the UN, you need a UN Security Council. So nobody can do anything until this decision is taken, and this is a New York work. And it's not only in the hands of the and the EU, but mainly of the permanent member of the UN Security Council. But there are other actions that we can do, and we feel responsible. And I would like to underline very clearly that the EU feel really responsible to help Myanmar. We have a long-standing work with Myanmar, and our responsibility really felt not only in the EU institution like the ES where I'm working, but with all the member states with whom we are working together. And we as an entity, we are working together, feeling this responsibility to protect the civilian population of Myanmar. But what we have in our hands, and I will come back later on what we have done, but just here, just to say what are our responsibility. We have a number of tools that can go from political, diplomatic, economic, development, humanitarians, crisis management instruments. These are available, and I can say, and I will say later on what which one of these instruments we have used and how we have used what the EU has done so far. We have some guidelines that we have developed on the responsibility to protect that by the EU and the member states. These guidelines were adopted several years ago, and we are also in the process of updating. So it's also a concept that we are promoting very much within the European Union. And we are trying to facilitate, to make, to raise the awareness of this concept, not only in the EU and within the EU, but in the international community and very much within the UN framework. How raising the case of Myanmar has been always one of our big priority within the UN General Assembly, at the UN Human Rights Council, at the UN Security Council, if not by the EU, by our member states, and also with the UN institution as a whole. We are trying to promote or activate the special procedure, the Commission of Inquiry. This was one of the examples that, remember that the EU is the pen holder of every year of the resolution on Myanmar since many, many years. So we are the one who are putting the resolution on Myanmar within the UN's, the Human Rights Council. That was addressing the problem of before, but the problem of before, we were saying already at the time, that could have degenerated in the problem that we have today. If it's not solved the situation, if we are not pushing for a democratization of the country, a good governance, and we had raised so many concerns, and we have been in the dialogue with the stakeholder at the time to try to avoid what we are going to see today. We were the promoter of a fact-finding mission. This is also something that the EU has done in the previous years, and we are very much interested to see how we can promote even now more resolution under the current situation. We are now looking at the situation and the scenario that we would like to see, or we are working in our responsibility is try to push for a genuine dialogue, so a negotiated exit of the current situation. And this has to be done with two pillars. First, to be successful, this negotiated exit strategy of the crisis will need to be domestically driven. So it's very important for us to speak with all the stakeholders, to find a solution. And this solution should not come with any use of force, and we are really promoting a solution that is coming from a dialogue, and a solution that cannot ignore the will of the people of Myanmar, which is the only way that we can guarantee a sustainability to the solution. If we do a solution taking into account the will of the Myanmar population. I will say later on also what we have done with ASEAN. ASEAN has played an important role and has also a responsibility to protect. And we are responsible, we feel responsible to work with the ASEAN as an institution or as an individual country to again raise awareness and promote our principle and our concept that I mentioned before. So to conclude, we do have a responsibility to help and protect the people of Myanmar. We may not be the only one, but we work together with the international community. Peace, protection of fundamental rights, good governance, and rule of law are at the core of our values. and not only for the EU, but for the rest of the world. So in this moment, more than ever for Myanmar. We will talk to this a little bit later. Then we have a long-standing commitment, and we feel committed about the democratic transition of Myanmar that happened in the past and unfortunately now has been interrupted by the coup d'etat. And we are also have a responsibility linked to the peace, because the EU is an international witness of the nationwide ceasefire agreement. So we also feel very responsible, because we are one of the very few country institutions that are a witness at the signature of the ceasefire agreement. We feel responsible for the Rohingya situation, and we have demonstrated our very hard work to help to protect the hopes, the future of these Rohingya people, especially in Bangladesh. We are one of the biggest contributors for the livelihood of the Rohingyas who are now hosted in Bangladesh. And we are also working, and we feel responsible to promote within the multilateral framework, both in New York and in Geneva, all the possible resolution and the language that could support the situation and a peaceful solution in Myanmar. We have done a lot also in this context to our delegation in both countries. And as I said, we are also responsible to move or to promote a regional reaction. And the best regional reaction that we have witnessed so far has been done by the ASEAN. And we will try to continue to support the ASEAN with our strategic partner and try to find a way how to work together and push for some peaceful solution. This is my conclusion in the general terms on your question, Adrian, on what we feel we are responsible. And maybe later on I will say a little bit more on what we have done in order to implement this responsibility.
Thank you very much indeed. It's helpful to hear you identify the different measures that have been taken, and such as trade regime and sanctions and the Commission of Inquiry. I'm sure we'll be returning to those things in today's discussion. It also leads us neatly on to the next question, which I'll put to Dr. Sasa. From his perspective, can he offer an assessment of the international response so far to the crisis? And what would you like to see in Europe's response to the continuing situation in Myanmar? Dr. Sasa, over to you.
Andrea, thank you very much indeed. As Her Excellency Pampaloni has said, a lot of response already that have been done by European Union. I again like to reiterate that my thanks to all the sanctions and all the action that has been taken the last 4 months. We have seen some individual from military junta has been sanctions of visas and their travel restrictions, and the military-run company too, a big company that was run by the military junta. And then those are, I know, that involve many hard work behind the scenes, and for that we appreciate. And the US government, the UK government also have sanctions to the military personnel who are responsible for all this crime against humanity, and some 2-3 companies that is giving the huge money to the Myanmar military junta. But again, I must say that we are still very much disappointed that our neighbor ASEAN have done 5 points, but those 5 points after 2 months, nothing has been done on the ground. So for that, we, of course, as it's time of international response, we know that a lot of international communities are waiting for ASEAN to take action, swift actions. And recently, UN resolution also called again to make that ASEAN 5 point to implement as swift as possible. But again, the military junta that we have been facing in Myanmar are just using all those international mechanisms and through ASEAN as just propaganda. and it's propaganda. Then they do not respect for international community. This military junta in Myanmar, we must understand that they have zero respect for international community, and they have the zero respect for the human being, because their actions shows that they are dehumanizing human being by their actions. And so international response has been in many ways very much too less to bring this military junta down, because there is more than 250,000 companies directly or indirectly benefiting military junta. That include like Total. Total is a big company that is working in Myanmar, is from Europe, from France. And then we are not asking them to stop the operation, but what we are asking them is, please stop giving the money to military junta. It's very simple. It's very simple. Because there's more than $100 million a month. If I combine Total, Pasco, and other four companies from international community working in Myanmar, every month they're giving more than $100 million directly to the state account. Of course, now all our money, revenue, are being stolen by military junta. So if I combine in a year, they will become more than $1 billion. Yeah. Just imagine $1 billion in the hands of murderous regime. What they do with the money? They go to China, they go to Russia, who will block, veto anything in UN Security Council. So there's a big business behind the scenes. But the people of Myanmar, unfortunately, are paying the price. The people of Myanmar are paying the price for that. So what we are asking to international community is to pass resolution in the state level, in the country level, to please withhold all those money in the home country. When we get democracy and the freedom, those money belongs to the people of Myanmar, will be released to the people of Myanmar, so that we can use those money for our school, our road, our hospital, right? But now all those money being paid from international company to military junta. The other day after they passed UN Security Council, UN General Assembly resolution on Myanmar, military chief Min Aung went to Moscow, Russia. He was looking at all the guns, helicopter, gunships, because he still have the money from the revenue. That's what's happening. So we feel that international community has the responsibility to stop all the money that is going in the hands of these killers. They are killers, really is. They are the murderer. They are terrorist organizations that the people of Myanmar are facing. There's one example. And secondly, we feel that these tougher, targeted, coordinated sanctions has to be coordinated under the leadership of a free and democratic world like Europe. Because when we talk about democracy and the freedom, we look to the West, because that is where democracy starts. So when we talk about the value of democracy, the value of human rights, the value of human being, where it is, and we look to Europe, the West. In that case, we are hoping that this coming month, we will see the leadership, stronger leadership from free and democratic countries around the world to come together. And the sanction has to come tougher and tougher and tougher until this military junta dry up of the income and dry up of the weapons, because that is what international community can do. At least that is what they can do. So when the money stop coming to them, when the weapon stop coming to them, they will stop the killing. They will stop their atrocities. That's the day when we can talk about dialogue and negotiations. When they are killing us, it's impossible to dialogue with our killer because there's no way to work. So what I'm proposing is that what we like to see from the view of responsibility to protect is now, okay, militarily is now, this is not what we want. Really what we want is, please help us to protect our people from COVID-19. Please help us, our people, to protect them from starvation and hunger. Please help us to protect our people from homelessness. Please help us to protect the people of the population of Myanmar from being killed ruthlessly by this military junta who is guilty of crime against humanity, guilty of atrocities, guilty of genocide, guilty of ethnic cleanses. Otherwise, what we will see is the bloodbath, the great civil war that will end up in another genocide. Really is, we don't want to have another genocide in our golden land. So I really believe international community as a whole has the power to prevent. To me, protection means prevention. If we do not protect timely manner, we fail to prevent atrocities. We fail to prevent another genocide. So for us, responsibility to protect is the prevention of another genocide that is coming in my country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sasa. It actually goes back to the points raised by Elizabeth with regards to the 5 concrete steps that could be taken, as she spoke of expanding sanctions and controlling financial flows to the military. So on that point, I will pass over to Elizabeth because she may, in fact, come back to her 5 points. Essentially the same question. What is your assessment of the international response so far? And what would you like to see going forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. And I want to indeed come back to my 5 points, but I think that Dr. Sasa highlighted and outlined it in such a concrete and powerful way. I mean, this is essentially really what is needed and what can be done. It's possible. As Dr. Sasa said, the international community has the power to do so. We just need the will to follow up on that. I also wanted to mention the role of the EU in Geneva at the Human Rights Council with regards to the fact-finding mission and the special rapporteur, but Paola mentioned that already, so I'll skip that part and go straight to the sanctions aspect. Again, Dr. Sasa really highlighted this so well. You need to cut the cash. The set of sanctions that we've seen from the EU and from the UK, this was a very welcome and necessary step, and we really commend that. But again, I think it's essential that these are expanded and there's a coordinated approach to it, and also that these sanctions are expanded to oil and gas entities, which essentially keep the junta in power, as we've heard. I want to point, with regards to sanctions, I do want to point to a report from the fact-finding mission on Myanmar, which was released in 2019 in September, and it's a report specifically on an assessment of economic interests of the Myanmar military. And I think this report could also be an important starting point to understand where the cash comes from and where you need to pull the trigger. I want to come to a second aspect of necessary action, and it's Security Council. A global arms embargo is the very least that the Council should do. And oftentimes when we talk about Myanmar and the Security Council, we immediately stop the conversation and we say, oh, but the Council is deadlocked. But it's important to actually look at the member states who are behind it, some of who are European, and how we can pressure them to act. Since the coup, we've seen the council meeting a couple of times, we've seen press statements being issued, but let's be very honest, these press statements don't mean anything if they don't lead to practical measures to protect populations on the ground. And I think the recent resolution by the General Assembly showed a very strong demand by large parts of the international community that, you know, we want the Security Council to do more. And here, on the question on Europe specifically, you know, the UK is a penholder, France, Estonia, Norway, Ireland, they can all exert leadership here and push the Council to take up its responsibility and present a negotiated draft resolution. There also is this argument, the argument that comes up a lot is, oh, but China will veto it. First of all, we don't know that. And second of all, a fear of veto really shouldn't inhibit action to start discussions. And we know, sadly, from other atrocity situations in the past that the Security Council speaking with a unified voice or having consensus, that is not a virtue in and of itself if it doesn't lead to action to protect populations. The last point I want to mention here is that of recognition. And it almost seems trivial or like a formality. And when you talk about recognition, it seems to be a very complicated process with the UN Credentials Committee and how does it work and you know, who decides. But the issue of recognition is actually one of the most immediate and direct tools that is available to states in the R2P toolbox to respond. And so we would want governments and we would want all European governments to, first of all, actively reject the recognition of the junta, but also to exert their diplomatic influence on the wider international community and on member states in the region to do so as well. All of this, I do want to come back to points which both Paola and Dr. Sasa mentioned, because this conversation here today about Europe and R2P, it comes back a lot to the values that Europe really prides itself with. You know, we are proud for championing human rights and standing up for democracy and really putting human beings at the forefront of all action. And I'm a European, and as a European citizen, I want my government to take a bold and a strong position and to not look away. And I think now is the time to actually demonstrate that we are willing and we're able to abide by these values, not just when it's comfortable and when it's convenient, but whenever and wherever lives are at stake, anywhere and at any time. And Myanmar is a test case right now, and we should really uphold and abide to the values, you know, that we're so proud to carry into the world. And I also want to come back to what Dr. Sasa said about the lack of action from ASEAN, which is a big concern. And I do think that the more forward-looking and bold the EU presents itself, the more pressure this may also put on others. The Security Council, ASEAN, but also individual key member states in the region like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. This may help to increase the pressure to stop delaying tactics and to actually explore strong and practical measures to respond. And again, Dr. Sasa mentioned it, we have the power, the international community can respond. We have failed Myanmar once before, and I think we really shouldn't make that same mistake again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Powerful point to end on there, actually. It reminds me of what Dr. Sasa was saying in terms of what will happen going forward. And obviously everyone on this panel will be aware of Syria. And I give a lecture on Syria every year since the crisis began. And every year I would have to update the statistics because the death toll was so much worse and so much worse and so much worse. And as we approach 1,000 people dead now in Myanmar, I really hope that next year we're not seeing the same thing that we saw in Syria, but we'll come on to that in the final question. We now look at what is the European Union doing well in response to the crisis. And Paola, as highlighted before, is going to talk about certain measures. And I hand the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks again to the speakers before me to highlight and also provoke some reaction from the EU on this. What Europe is doing well, as I said at the beginning, we have trying to put all our tools that we have at disposal, there are tools that are at disposal of the EU. We are talking about the EU as a 27 member states governed by our institution. 1 second, because I have the battery lower. Okay. Can you see me? Yes. So we have put available all the tools that we have at disposal. What are tools and what we have done on the tools of disposal? We cannot use the tools we are not in our hands. You know how the EU is constructed and how it's functioning, and you, all of you are fully knowledgeable of our possibility. Within our possibility, we have explored all the possible action, and we have done diplomatically. Let's start with our diplomatic action. We have been immediately denouncing on the 1st of February with a statement of our High Representative, the coup d'etat. So it was an immediate reaction that was done, probably was one of the first on the 1st of February. And in February itself, we had a meeting of all the 27 Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the EU on the 22nd of February, and we had adopted immediately conclusions that I would always refer as the immediate reaction. In our conclusion, we ask immediately a ceasefire, the stop of the violence against the people, and the liberation of all the politicians who were in arbitrary detention. And we had delivered a number of messages linked to the humanitarian development assistance that I will expand later on. This was not only, I don't count how many statements we have done, but there will be 10 statements denouncing politically the situation and calling for liberation of detainees and restoring the democratic path. That is on first point on the diplomatic. Then we have not recognized the junta. You have never seen any documents from the EU that has recognized the junta, the military junta. We normally, well, recognition is a long story. I don't want to enter in the legal terminology of the recognition of the government. You recognize a state, you don't recognize a government. But let's say that we have not start any interaction or bilateral talks with the military junta. We have started intensive diplomatic engagement from even before and from the day of the 1st of February in the region and beyond the region, at the level of the High Representative and at the level of senior officials of the EU institution, and also by our member states, talking bilaterally with the regional stakeholders of all the countries in the world. And it's very important. There are quite important countries in the world that play a crucial roles in the crisis in Myanmar, and we have not shied away, and we have always Myanmar in our agenda, with not only with the region, which is obvious, but also with other important countries in the world. Last week, when it was at the beginning of of this month, the High Representative was also in Jakarta, and was one of the first missions that he did after the COVID pandemic. So just to give you a signal also of the interest of the High Representative himself to travel and have one of his first travel abroad to Jakarta and ASEAN, where of course Myanmar was very important part of his agenda with the ASEAN as a group, but also bilaterally with Indonesia, and he had several phone calls also with Foreign Minister of ASEAN. We have launched, and we have launched together with the colleagues of the like-minded, some sort of a coordination, and we do coordinate with the like-minded countries. And it's not by chance that you have seen the package of sanctions that have been adopted on the same day of the sanction adopted by the US and the UK. It's not by coincidence, but there is a very strong coordination in the activity that we are doing with like-minded countries. At my level, I would say at the capital level, but also very much at the local level with our head of delegation. So there are quite important interaction with the like-minded countries. We had a contact with the military junta only once, because we wanted to make sure it's a military to military. we wanted to make sure that all the statement and the conclusion of our minister were conveyed crystal clear to the military junta. So they receive the request and they appeal directly to our military representative in the ES. And then we have contact regularly with the civil society, with the stakeholders, with the government of national unity, and with the local population. So it's not that we don't. There was a question in the chat that we are not interacting with the local population or people who are vulnerable. We do through the civil society, and I can tell you we have a very regular and intensive contact with the civil society and with those who are representing the local population and those who are currently suffering. And this is only on the diplomatic side. We are working, and I will not have to expand too much because I know that we don't have much time, but we are working a lot within the multilateral framework, and this I mentioned before, in the UN and in both in New York and in Geneva, to promote action and robust resolution. It's not true that we are not doing it. We do all the time. And if you have, just as an example, if you look at the resolution of the General Assembly, all our member states have adopted a resolution. It's not the EU or not our member states who are not who are watering the text, are other players that are not part of the EU institution. But we are reaching out also, this player who are trying to weaken the language, and we are trying to do our best to convince them to keep a robust language that is coming out from the UN Security Council. But we know the problem. I don't want to expand on this. Elizabeth mentioned the other important things we have done. Sanction. We have adopted the 3 packages of sanction. We have sanctioned 29 individuals, military and people linked to the military, 2 military control conglomerates. Basically, these conglomerates, they control all the economy in the country, 3 state-owned companies, and the War Veteran Association. So these are already in our list of sanctions, adopted in 3 times in very good coordination with some of like-minded countries I mentioned before. Then we come on also what Dr. Sasha said, we need help and humanitarian assistance. In terms of finance, we have 2 channels of finance. One is the development assistance and one is the humanitarian assistance. The development assistance, we were given lots of development assistance to the government of Myanmar before, even through budget support. So the first things that we have done, we have put on hold all our budget support because it was going through the military junta. And we didn't want a single euro of our development assistance that was channeled through the government institution taken over by the military junta. But on the other hand, we were looking immediately and very quickly to all the existing programs, how could they be reoriented to make sure that the needs that are still are there of the local population could still be financed through our development assistance. The schools have been taken over by the military, but there are lots of displacement of population. There are endangering agricultural crops that could lead to food shortages. The civil society is very important. It's under pressure and distress, and they need support. So this is something that we have done, and we have tried to stop the money going to the junta, but still trying to finance those who are working for a peaceful solution or to help people in needs as much as we can. It's not an easy task, and it's not easy to deliver. And this is for the past assistance. We are already working now for the current assistance for the future, for the budget of this year, to help the civil society to try to guarantee some sort of education for the children that may not go to school. We are trying to see what can be done. Even now we have lots of help from internet and education. And we are also looking at the food resilience. It's important that the chain of food is maintained. People need also to make sure that there is enough resource in the Myanmar to feed their own population. All this work, I wanted to underline, are done, or financial assistance is done to very careful avoid engagement with the military authority. So that is on the development. And then a point on the humanitarian assistance. We have done a tremendous action in response to the significant humanitarian needs that were generated by the crisis since the coup. We have allocated 9 million immediately after the coup, and 1.5 million was dedicated to cross-border implication of the crisis, because lots of people, we know, they fled to Thailand and India, generated problems also for those refugees who were in Thailand and India. Our humanitarian assistance, so and we are talking about the 9 million additionally to the 11 million that were still under implementation in the past. So we are talking about 20 million that have been put immediately on the table, and they are helping health. And this is very much also linked to what Dr. Sasha said about the growing crisis on COVID. We are trying to see with the Red Cross and with UNICEF how we can provide some medical materials and vaccine that should be implemented, not through the military, but through organization that we trust. So health is a very important component, food security, and multi-sectoral emergency assistance. All this action will be contracted through the UN agency or international NGOs. And I repeat, none of our humanitarian assistance is going through the military channel. But I have to say there are huge problems.
I'm just conscious we've got 3 minutes left.
Okay, I'm coming to the last, and I said also the difficulty to provide our humanitarian assistance, because sometimes also the convoys of humanitarian assistance are blocked by the military, and they don't reach the local population in needs. Is a problem that we are really addressing with all the like-minded who have the same problem. Conclusion: we were engaged, we are engaged, and we are really stepping up our engagement, using all the tools that we have at our disposal to help this very gigantic humanitarian and political crisis. And sorry if I've been too long, but I wanted really to make sure that we are trying to do all what we can to help the population of Myanmar.
It's okay, and thank you for responding to the comments that are raised in the chat, because I understand that we're running out of time. If I could just hand the floor to Elizabeth and then Dr. Sasa, and just offer you 60 seconds each with 2 minutes to go, if you would like to raise any final comments or observations. Thank you very much. Dr. Sasa, would you like to go first?
Yes, quickly. I think R2P is recognition of the National Unity Government of Myanmar. And I think R2P is humanitarian assistance to the people of Myanmar in the area of food, in the area of health, in the area of education, in the area of human rights, because it's quite big humanitarian. And R2P3 is a sanctions. It's a very big R2P. So I think responsibility to sanction, responsibility to provide humanitarian assistance, responsibility to recognize the will of the people of Myanmar, democratic will, by recognizing the representative of the people of Myanmar, that is the National Unity Government of Myanmar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth, hand the floor to you. Hopefully it doesn't just cut out at the end of the hour. I should know what happens, but I don't. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. I'll be very brief. Perhaps just to sum up, I think that, you know, it's really not rocket science, R2P, and how we can apply R2P to Myanmar. We have a multitude of experts. We have special rapporteurs. We had the fact-finding mission. We have special envoys, human rights defenders, and activists who continuously tell us what to do, and not just since February, but since years and decades. And only yesterday we had the special rapporteur on Myanmar coming out, calling on the Human Rights Council and calling on member states to actually establish an emergency coalition of governments to provide humanitarian relief, ensure accountability, and cut the cash of the junta. So we have the recommendations. We know what we can do. We just need to act upon it. And if we don't, then yes, then we fail the citizens of Myanmar. And we also fail all populations around the world who are actually at risk of atrocities and who have genuine faith in the United Nations and in its member states to uphold their commitment when their own government fails to do so. So I'll end there. But again, I want to thank everyone. It was such a thought-provoking conversation, and Paola and Dr. Sasa, it was wonderful to exchange with you. Thanks to you, Adrian.
No, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you very much to everyone that has joined us today for this discussion on what is surely one of the most important and timely crises on planet Earth. You've raised many of the key points. We've had a full discussion on the tools in the toolbox, to use the R2P language, but also issues around accountability, democracy, values, and human protection in general, which, whilst not necessarily within the R2P framework, are still vitally important and actually help protect people on the ground. On that note, I will bring this all to an end and just say thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.